I am Mike Erickson, Associate Vice President for Community Engagement at Internet2, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled The Significance of Routing Security, Safeguarding the Critical Infrastructure. As we hear from our presenters, please feel free to post questions in the Q&A portion of your Zoom window, and the presenters will respond to them as they are able. We have also reserved time at the end for interactive question and answer and discussion. This event is being recorded, and the video and slides will be available next week. So let's just jump right into it. We are fortunate and very pleased to have with us today Aftab Siddiqui, Senior Manager, Internet Technology Asia Pacific from the Internet Society, joining us from Sydney, Australia, and Steve Wallace, Director of Routing Security at Internet2 from here in the United States. So welcome to you both, Aftab and Steve.
Thank you. All right, so thank you, Mike. So I'll take it from there. First thing, thank you everyone for joining. I can see some very familiar names in the list, and for those who are not very familiar to me and my name, I'm Aftab Siddiqui. I work for Internet Society, and I've been part of the Manners Initiative, which is the mutually agreed norms for routing security at ISOC for since the very beginning. I joined ISOC like 5 years ago. So I'll be sharing a few things with all of you, highlighting the importance of the routing security. And I have done this so many times, and every time I try to share my slides on Zoom, I have to ask people if I'm sharing the right one. So someone has to nudge it, yes or no. Seems like that. Yes, your screen share is okay. I think Zoom has fixed this for us, so it shows that it is actually the right slide. Right, so this is who I am. You can reach out to me on my email address, or you can follow me on Twitter, which still exists, about some rants about routing security. So let's start with some basics. If you're part of this webinar, this shouldn't be any surprise to you at all. This is the routing table size at my home router in Sydney. I'm receiving around close to 928,000 routes in V4 and 180,000 V6 routes. So it's already more than 1 million. In terms of that, around 74,500 ASNs I can see in the routing table from where I am. What we suggest, I've been part of this ecosystem for the last 15 years, spent most of my time in the service provider sector, so running ISPs and then consulting for ISPs, and then now doing this. So what we suggest every operator, every network operator, every ISP, every enterprise, when they connect to the internet, make sure that they follow these basic principles. Whenever they connect, if you are already connected, you can do a checklist saying, okay, have I done this, this, or that? When you connect to the internet, make sure that you have route objects created for all your prefixes. Whatever you are announcing, all your routes have the appropriate origin ASN. Of course, it should be your own unless you have given it to somebody else. Make sure that there are right entries in the AS set. If you have one, you should. And the correct AS set is mentioned in the peering DB as well. If you don't have a peering DB account, you should have one. In today's day and age, everyone should have RPKI ROAS. There are some nuances attached to it, which Steve will talk about it, but there shouldn't be a reason that you should not have a ROA at all. Make sure that you clean up the route objects, because there are so many IRR databases which are not authenticated. So you can show up in different IRR databases as well. So let me go through them in detail. Like any network which joins the internet society has a network as well. We have a research network. So we have two nodes. One is in Sydney, another one is in Zurich. So we have followed the same principle which we are preaching. We have route objects because the resources are from the APNIC. That's why we have the route objects in the APNIC IRR databases. So you can see what we are announcing and what is in the route objects. There are no ambiguities about that. Same is the case with the RPKI. We do have, because we are announcing a /24 from Sydney, another one from Zurich. So we have two distinct announcements with the same origin AS. So we have two ROAs. There are a few other ROAs for testing, but of course, since we are only announcing from 141384, which is our ASN, this is valid. Similarly, in the pairing DB, we have all the details mentioned, where we are connected on the internet exchange points, which facility we are in, and all the details or the contact details are there. Just remember one thing about the IRR AS set, which I have highlighted, right? The format of this AS set is important. So I'll go into this at the end, but just remember why this is significant. Now, the problem is if you do not do what we are suggesting, there is a problem. The problem is that it can be misused. That information, if you not provide that information, then there is a possibility that you are putting yourself in the harm's way. The only way for me to protect you is to have a validated information. How can I validate that information? I can do it from the IRR databases, or most importantly, from the RPKI ROA. So if I don't have that, I cannot protect you, because as I mentioned in the first slide, there are more than 75,000 networks on the internet. You can't trust all of them. But most of them would like to provide you a secure infrastructure. But to make that happen, they need information from you. They can't just assume that who you are. So you have to provide that validated information. And the slogan we use a lot is called help me help you. So I can help you, but you need to help me first with the right information. So just a reminder, if you are on this webinar, this should not be a surprise to you. IRR system is an honor-based system. Every information there is based on trust that, okay, that information should be valid. The problem is not the RIRs, with our regional internet registries, because in the RIRs, you can only create route objects of your own resources. I cannot create a route object for Internet 2. I cannot Internet 2 prefixes. And similarly, Internet 2 cannot create route objects for my prefixes in ARIN. But there are many third-party IRR databases. For example, RADB, AllDB, and many ISPs run their own IRR as well. So they are not authenticated. Some of them are not authenticated. And information can be put into those databases without your knowledge and without anyone's knowledge. So we looked into this problem from the research point of view. We do have a small team who try to find out information, what we can do, what can help investigate the issues in the routing, the global routing. So we looked up the data in RADB and compare it with the route objects in the RIRs. So if you go to this URL at the bottom, you will find there is data from RADB, all DB, and a comparison with all 5 RIRs. And we do it every 2 weeks. And it's available on this URL without any changes. So you can have a look at this data, the raw data. It's in JSON format, so it is very easy to parse. So this is just a snapshot of what you will see. For example, there is one allocation from APNIC 1.0.4.0/22. It's a /22 delegation. You can go into the APNIC delegation file and you will find that it happened in 2011. But on the right side, if you look at the route objects, you will see there are 4 distinct route objects for the same prefix. All 4 of them are with a different origin AS. And it is created by entities which are not authorized to create all of them. And this is the problem we are trying to highlight, because a prefix is allocated to someone, but route objects are created by somebody else. It creates a attack vector, because now this can be misused. If I try to start originating 1.0.4.0/22 with any of these ASNs, and my service provider is only relying on IRR databases or RADB, then they will just accept it, because they will consider it as a valid announcement, unless they have other features enabled of routing security, which we preach in manners. Most importantly, filtering on the basis of ASN and route filters based on what your customer has provided to you with from RPKI ROA plus route objects. So if you have these measures in place, this can be stopped. Otherwise, it will be announced to the global routing table. So what we did is we picked up some of the Internet to member ASN. So they are not all. If I'm not mistaken, probably 25, 30 of them in the list, and checked multiple statuses. Number one is the exec. For example, if there is a resource allocation, the example I gave is a /22. So that /22 exists in the RADB as it is, right? So if you look at these route objects, when they were created, I mean, in the first couple of them were created back in 1995. Something happened in 2005. There are 20 odd route objects. And then again, back in 2019 and 2020, a new route objects popped up in RADB. So, and the reason all these route objects are pointing towards Internet to member ASN in the origin AS category. So if the ASN is mentioned in the origin AS, we have highlighted it here. So who are those ASNs? For example, it's AS 600, 2152, 22742, 237, 210. So I have only listed objects with more than or equal to 5 objects in the RADB. The most interesting part, which I have seen here for these members, is quite different for other regions and other associations. What we have seen is, for example, we did it for Australia and New Zealand, and we saw that most of the objects were created by entities which do not own these resources. For example, the example I showed you, it was created by AAPT, which is a service provider in Australia, which doesn't own all these resources. In case of Internet 2 members, it's a good sign that it is created by Internet 2 members themselves. So all these route objects are actually created by the ASN resource holders themselves. So there is, at least in the exact section, there is no problem which I have, which I see. There are some problems which I explained, but at least from the creation point of view, nobody else is creating route objects on your behalf. Right. So the other category is more specific. For example, a /22 was allocated to you. So of course, you can announce more specifics out of this, a /24, a /23, multiple /24. So you will see multiple more specific route objects in the RADB as well. And that's a lot of them. So again, around 2018 and 2019, 2019 is more significant. Around a lot of route objects appeared in the RADB. And most of them came from only one university. Which I will explain in a moment. Again, in the last couple of years, the amount of route objects appeared in the RADB from some of the Internet 2 members is quite significant. The number is not growing right now, but whatever happened in 2019 and 2020 is something I'm really I would really like to understand what happened. So, and here's the problem which I was trying to highlight. So AS7896, which is the University of Nebraska, they have created more than 300 route objects for the specific resources they have, but they are only announcing 7 prefixes out of those. So there are more than 300 stale objects existing in RADB, created by themselves. So it's not that someone else created them. They created it themselves. It's from their own origin AS. And this is something which we are, which the community is discouraging, even in the RPKI arena. There is a BCP RFC which suggests that do not create ROAS for the routes you are not advertising, because it also creates a problem, a security problem. It leaves a security loophole. Same thing applies here in the route objects. So if you are not advertising something, if the route doesn't exist in the global routing table, please delete those route objects. So same case with 6360 and the other ASN. They are not advertising the exact amount of routes and there are more route objects, either in more specific and exact in RADB. And I'm only talking about RADB. I haven't checked all DB and other IRR databases as well. So again, as mentioned, who's creating those objects? There are only few outliers. For example, some are created by Akamai, some created by other entities. A couple of them are created by an email address which ends in gmail.com. So otherwise, there are very few. Like you can count them on one hand, which is very good in terms of the security point of view, that nobody else is creating route objects on your behalf. Most of them are created by the university accounts themselves. So the biggest route object chunk I mentioned was from the University of Nebraska, and it is created by an account holder from University of Nebraska. So there is no wrongdoing in that sense here, at least. There is a third category of resources. First one is you have exact and more specific. And the third category is where you only have more specific. No one has created a route object for a exact allocation. For example, no one created for /22, but they have created it for the specifics only. So again, because as I mentioned, something happened between 2018, 19, and 2020. There is a big jump in that period. Afterward, it's again going down. Same case here. There is an ASN 11537 with more than around 20 route objects, and they are not announcing anything. So that ASN doesn't even exist in the routing table. So I mean, it says was visible to 2% of the 380 IPv6 RESTful peers. So probably they're announcing to someone in a localized manner, but yes, we don't see it in a global routing table. So again, that is a issue. It's just a security nuance. Make sure that you avoid that. It's not that it's going to break something, but it's just recommended not to do it. Now, so remember the duct tape I showed on the aeroplane, which is absolutely fine, by the way, as someone from the flying industry told me that putting tapes on aeroplane is fine. It is, it's not a problem. From the routing security perspective, let's consider it as a problem. So here, APNIC, we consider it as no duct tapes. It's much more reliable, but has the same problem which we have in the route object in the IRR database. And the problem is that having ROAs for routes which you are not announcing is not recommended. It creates a threat vector, and then anybody can misuse that point. Unfortunately, ARIN is not doing extremely well in the members in the ARIN region. I wouldn't call ARIN. ARIN is doing an amazing job. It's the member in the ARIN region are not taking up RPKI extensively. So I picked up the same Internet 2 members, and their average of the ROA, valid ROA, is around 13%, which is significantly low from the global average, which is around 41 to 42%, depending upon how you look at it. Where RIPE NCC and members in the RIPE NCC region and APNIC region are doing quite extensively well. There are some issues related to that, which Steve will discuss in detail. So there are genuine issues. So it's not like that nobody wants to create ROA. There are some genuine issues. There are a lot of legacy space. We have it in the APNIC region as well, legacy space. So I understand that problem. But yes, and I think ARIN is trying to address that. Steve will talk about it in detail. The first step is you have to create a ROA, but the second step is once the ROA is created, then you have to validate that ROA, right? So there are some big operators, for example, Verizon, NTT, AT&T, Hurricane Electric. They are all doing route origin validation and dropping the invalids. But of course, North America being one of the biggest region and most members are there. If you look at in journal, the region-wise is still lacking behind in the route origin validation. Not because it's because there are a lot of ASNs in the region, so many are still not doing it. That's public data again, done by APNIC, so you can have a look if your ASN is performing well or not. There are some false positive in this data set, so you can have a look at that. Now, if you go to the Manners Observatory, right, and if you're not familiar with the Manners Observatory, we collect data from public sources for BGP hijack or misorigination, you call it, BGP leaks. So we have data sources from GRIP, which is the Georgia Tech, run by Georgia Tech Institute. We also take data feed from the BGP stream, which is now Cisco, owned by Cisco. We get information from the Qaeda spoofer project. We also get information from Cider report for the Bogons, and so on and so forth. And we have our own data sources for RPKI measurement, and we also get information from the RIPE RIS project. So we combine all them and then show it publicly. But if you want to have access to that, you can always reach out to the Internet 2, and they can help you with that. and you will get information about your own ASN in detail. We would love you to sign for the Manners initiative if you haven't, but that will give you that additional information that how your network is performing in the global routing table. So what is the solution? Yeah.
We have a couple of questions before we get too far past in the deck. One was on slide 19. You mentioned creating ROAs and enabling ROV. Is it truly for edge networks to perform ROV?
Okay. Thanks, Brett, for raising that point. Yes, it is not necessary for the edge networks. Okay, let me explain. So if when I gave you the example of there are 75,000 networks in the global routing table, 80% of them are stub networks. It means they don't have any downstream customers. So those networks really don't have to do any route origin validation. But we also encourage them to do it because if their service provider is not doing route origin validation, they will still receive invalid routes. So at least they can filter out getting the invalid routes to them. So if something is invalid in the global routing table and their service provider is not doing the ROV, they can protect themselves from receiving any invalid routes to them. They don't have to, but it is encouraged to that they should do it. Route origin validation is predominantly beneficial for the overall internet ecosystem if the big in the old terms, the tier 1s and the tier 2 service providers implement them. This will give the biggest benefit to the whole ecosystem. So a couple of months ago, Doug Midori from Kentic and Job Snyder from Fastly, they did an analysis where they said that more than 50 or 60% of the global traffic is growing through the validated networks, or for example, for those from those networks which are doing route origin validation. So yes, it's already happening, but again, there is still a chunk of missing from the validation side. So the sub networks don't have to do it. If they want to protect themselves, they should. But predominantly, it is the tier 1s and the tier 2s. So that is Brad Mingwei Zhang. For those who are not aware of Mingwei, he's an amazing researcher, and he has provided a lot of data set to us for us to review. Do check the BGP kit he has created for the public good. So let me review his question. What is the specific BCP recommending not creating ROA for prefix not announced? Understand the security implication of doing so. So let me quickly, it's the RFC number is in 9,000. So I'll look it up right in a moment and tell you the exact number. The implication is, for example, so ROA only protects you from the misorigin hijack or the origin hijack. It doesn't protect you from the path hijack. So for example, my AS is, for the sake of example, my AS is 6. My AS is 2, right? Although I should be giving the documentation AS example, but just to make it simple, my AS is 2, and I create a ROA for all my resources, which I'm not even advertising, right? So one resource is 1.1.1.0/24, and the origin AS for that, and created a ROA for origin AS 2. Now, the problem with that is, since I'm not advertising that, if someone start prepending with AS2 as their downstream and start announcing the same prefix 1.1.1.0/24, which belongs to Cloudflare, then it will validate the ROA, because the origin is still ASN2. It is coming from the downstream of a hijacker or someone who is doing it by mistake, let's assume. It will still pass the ROA because the origin is still ASN2 and prefix is something else. Unless you have route filtering in place where you say, well, this network should not be announcing these prefixes, it will validate the ROA. And that is the problem we have seen in some cases. In the case of a I forgot clay swap crypto exchange, when the hijacker hijacked their resources, they actually hijacked their ASN as well. They didn't have the ROA for that resource, but if there was a ROA, if they could have hijacked that validated ROA as well. And that is the problem which we have seen. The problem occurs from our own preaching, because when the RPKI came like half a decade ago, I mean, it's been there for almost a decade, but when it became mainstream, what we were saying that go create ROA. And most of the operators said, okay, fine, we will just go create ROAs for everything. So they created ROA with MSA, which is the maximum subnet mask for them. So for example, if you have a /22, the operator went in and created a ROA for a /22 going up to a /24. Means everything in between is covered under one ROA. 2/23, 4/24s, everything is covered, even though they are only announcing a /22. So if someone tried to hijack, and if someone tried to hijack a /24 from that bit, they can do it as long as the origin AS remains intact. And that is the problem we have seen in a couple of occasions. It is not a widespread problem, but yes, it exists. So I'll come back to you about the exact RFC number. I hope that answers your questions. Right. So going back to, I'll have to go back to my first slide here. So the pairing DB one. So the problem here, which I have highlighted, is the IRR AS set. AS set tells you it's a combination of ASN in your network. For example, if you're a service provider, you have more than 25 customers. All 25 customers are using their own ASN. So what will happen is they will be part of your AS set. What we have seen recently, there are two types of AS set. One is called hierarchical AS set, another one is called non-hierarchical AS set. The one I have mentioned here is hierarchical or hierarchical AS set, where it starts with the ASN of your own. And putting ASN of your own in front means this is authenticated. We have seen an incident where people have created AS set for Facebook, for Google, for Akamai in different IRR databases, in RADB, in AllDB, and other databases, where it is not authenticated. And if I'm just looking up the AS set for pairing DB, and you only have, for example, AS Internet 2 as an AS set, that AS set can exist in different IRR databases and have different members. If you have a hierarchical AS set, it can only exist in the RIR database because that is an authenticated one. So we always encourage everyone to use the authenticated IRR objects, which is the hierarchical one. So here's a summary of what you should all be doing. Make sure that you do not rely on the third-party IRR databases. If you can, if there are no contractual problems, create ROAs. If someone has created route objects on your behalf, look it up and ask that IRR operator to delete them. Start implementing origin validation, and again, only create hierarchical ASN. And if you are interested in getting all this information, please reach out to Internet 2. They can help you with that information, or you can reach out to Manners as well. That's all from my end. Thank you.
Thanks, Aftab. Greetings. My name's Steve Wallace, and I'm the director of Internet 2's Routing Integrity Initiative. And I have some slides to share here. We're going to talk a bit about some of the things Aftab talked about and how they relate to the agreement with Aaron. So key takeaway points that we'll make in this presentation: getting your IP numbers covered by an Aaron agreement allows you to make your network more secure because it enables you to make ROAs. Signing the Aaron agreement for your legacy IP resources locks in remarkably lower fees, Aaron fees. Sometimes they're 20 to 40 times lower. It's easier to successfully request changes in the agreement from Aaron if you follow their guidance. And Aaron has changed the no property rights section so that more institutions have less of a problem with signing that agreement. So Aftab talked about IRR entries having a lot of duct tape around them. There are many inconsistent entries in IRR databases, and they're not secure. So anyone can create records about your resources in an IRR database. Now, there are authenticated IRRs that you can access through your regional internet registry. So in our case, it would be Aaron. And to access those services, you need to actually sign the Aaron agreement. But that doesn't, even if you register resources in Aaron's IRR, there's still a risk that they may be misrepresented in other IRRs that are not authenticated. So the advantage of RPKI ROAs, it's another kind of record, is the only ROAs exist are the authenticated ROAs. So networks can trust that information as being authentic, whereas with IRR, they don't know for sure if it's authentic. And these are, I call these the magic button of internet security because they're very easy to create and they provide substantial protection against misconfigurations and some forms of hijacking. And when we look at the rate of adoption in the rest of the internet we call the commodity internet, it's over 40%. So over 40% of the routes in the global internet are protected by RPKI ROAs. Within our community, it's about 12%. And so we're well behind, and we need to make an effort to improve. We should be leading, we shouldn't be following this. One of the reasons we're following is that you have to have an agreement with Aaron that covers your IP addresses to actually create these ROAs that protect your networks. And when you look at the networks that interconnect through Internet 2, so the research and education community, roughly 46% of all the routes we see don't have Aaron agreements. These are legacy addresses where the IP addresses were allocated before Aaron existed. Without an Aaron agreement, you can't create the ROAs. Now, a lot of people think they have an Aaron agreement because they can manage the whois information. They can log into the Aaron portal and keep their information up to date. And they may have an Aaron agreement for other resources. So for example, it's common for people to have some of their IP addresses that are not covered by an Aaron agreement, some that are, or they may have autonomous system numbers that are covered by an Aaron agreement. And so they see a bill from Aaron, they pay the bill every year. And when they log into the Aaron portal, they see all of their networks. So they assume that all of their networks are actually covered by the Aaron agreement. And that's frequently, especially in our community, not the case. So I have, first of all, hopefully someone can share the slide deck I'm presenting right now is, I'm going to share it in the chat. So that's a link to the slide deck I am sharing, and there's some links embedded in the slide deck, which can be useful. So one of the first links, and I'm going to jump to it, is this is a public spreadsheet that contains a list of all the networks that we see connected to the Internet 2 network that have IP addresses without an ARIN agreement. Now, the spreadsheet was initially created in February. And if you scroll down through the spreadsheet, if you see an institution that's in green instead of just white, that means since that time, they've actually covered their IP addresses with an agreement. So there are about 40 in here, organizations that have signed ARIN agreements since the first time we produced the spreadsheet. But there's 700 organizations in this list. So if you're here or you know an organization that's in this list, they're unable to create these important records to protect their network. We also produce detailed route reports, and this other link, I'm not going to actually pull those up, but this other link links you to a GitHub directory where roughly on a weekly basis, we produce updated reports. The directory contains reports for each Internet 2 connector. So you need to know the name of your Internet 2 connector, but that's usually obvious to most people. So you can fetch an Excel file to give you a detailed report on all of the networks you announced Internet 2. It has a lot of details, including whether the routes you announce are consistent, whether they have IRR records associated with them, and whether those records are consistent with the route we see, whether they have ROAs and what the status of the ROA is, and other pretty useful information, including whether the set of IP addresses represented by the route is covered by an ARIN agreement. The routes are pretty dense in all the information they contain, and we periodically have office hours to go over questions about routing integrity and routing security, and that's an opportunity to review your report, or you can send me email if you're interested, and I'm happy to go through the details of the connector report for the connector that connects you to the Internet 2 network. A little bit more about ARIN, American Registry for Internet Numbers. They're a regional internet registry. Their region covers Canada, the US, and parts of the Caribbean. So ARIN's role in life primarily is to coordinate the allocation of IP addresses to make sure that IP addresses are unique globally, and they coordinate the essentially assignment of IP addresses in their region, and they maintain information like whois information. So if I type whois for a particular IP number, and that IP number is from an organization that's within the US or Canada or the Caribbean, the records you get back are maintained by them. These addresses that don't have agreements are called legacy number resources, so that they were allocated before ARIN existed. So ARIN came into existence in December of 1997. And so many of the research and education organizations in the US were using internet addresses and had internet addresses allocated to them before ARIN existed. And those are called legacy resources. ARIN has something called a registration services agreement. There used to be two versions of this agreement. There used to be one for legacy resources and another one for non-legacy resources. It's actually a single agreement today. It has wording in the agreement that provides slightly different terms depending on whether these are legacy resources or not legacy resources. So there are services Aaron provides to legacy resource holders. Again, this is one of the things that makes it confusing. People commonly think their IP addresses are under an agreement. So the whois services, the reverse DNS delegations, RPKI, ROAs are not provided without an agreement, but DNSSEC access is provided. They used to have an internet routing registry, which I think it was a non-authenticated registry essentially, and that you may have had access without an agreement. But the new authenticated IRR errand host requires an agreement. Benefits of the errand agreement: access to their authenticated IRR and their RPKI hosted RPKI ROAs. So you can easily create a ROA to provide this non-duct tape version of the protection for your IP address space. You also can participate in Aaron's governance, and you might sleep better knowing that you actually have a written agreement that says you're the authorized user of these IP addresses. So, you know, these IP addresses have gotten to be worth a lot of money. So I think a /16 may be worth around $3 million. And many people who have those resources, they're critically important to them, but they don't have any documents. If they're legacy resources, they're unlikely to have any documents that actually show that they're theirs. And signing an Aaron agreement gives you explicit terms of service from the organization that says who's authorized to use those IP addresses. Creating a ROA for your resources is really sort of the easy button. Aaron has made it very easy to create these records. It's a single web page that has 3 questions on it, 3 fields on it. So it's very simple to create these. So there are changes coming to Aaron's fees. So today, the fees for legacy resources, regardless of how many you have, it's $175 a year. And it can go up $25 a year after that. But that's only for people who have their agreements signed this year. If you wait until next year, and so you lock in those low fees with the cap of $25 a year increase if you sign this year. If you don't sign this year, if you wait until next year or longer to sign the Aaron agreement, not only do you miss out on having in place better routing security, but you also lose access to those discounted fees and you pay the regular Aaron fees. And the regular Aaron fees are substantially more. So if you have a /16, which is pretty common in our, there are 500 organizations, well, just under 500 organizations that have /16s with no Aaron agreement that connect to internet to. So that goes from $175 a year to $4,000 a year. And frequently, people who have /16s also have a /24 or 2 in addition to the 16, and that bumps it up to $8,000 a year. So many of these are looking at $8,000 a year versus $175 a year. And if you look at the community as a whole, if all of the addresses were covered by an agreement, that'd be about $75,000 a year in fees for all of them. Versus if they wait next year, it will be over $2 million a year more than that. So like I said, sometimes you think it's covered by an Aaron agreement, but it's hard to tell. In fact, the only way to tell for sure is to log into the Aaron portal. So for most of these organizations, somebody is maintaining their whois information and they can log in. And if you go to the dashboard, and then on the dashboard, you click on the section that lists the networks that you hold. And it will give you a list of your networks. And when you click on each network, it will tell you in the network information pane, if it says RSA/LRSA, yes, that means it's covered by an agreement. If it says no, it's not covered by an agreement. So Aaron, and I'm going to quote Aaron here. Aaron says to maintain uniformity and consistency and in fairness to other organizations, modifications to the agreement are not permitted. However, Aaron will consider limited modifications for governmental entities in circumstances where there is a demonstrated need. Demonstrated need refers to circumstances where a governmental entity would not be able, under applicable law, to execute the agreement absent the modifications. So this is a link where Aaron provides specific guidance in how to request changes. So frequently, a public institution, this is never the case for a private institution, but frequently a public university or public college will be in a state and the state law will prohibit them from signing agreements with certain terms. And some of those terms are maybe in the Aaron agreement. And so Aaron has a process. If you don't follow this process, it doesn't work very well. But Aaron has a process where you can say, here are the sections of the agreement that I can't sign or we can't sign because of state law. And here's the citing the state law that prevents us from signing those sections. And so if you carefully make these requests based strictly on what's required by your law, Aaron will accept those. Aaron's getting a lot because of the fee changes and the additional security you get from an agreement. They're getting swamped with, which is a good thing, with organizations wanting to cover their addresses with the agreement. If you're part of the research and education community and you need to ask for changes because you're a public institution, Aaron asks that you include in the ticket you open to start the process the line, "Attention, Lisa Lydell." I think she's very busy right now, but they want to funnel most of those through Lisa. And then last slide, here's some resources that you can use that relate to these that may be of interest. And I want to cut it off here to leave time for some questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, AFTAB. Really some critical information there. We have time for a couple of questions. If there are any additional questions out there, feel free to put them in the Q&A. All right, well, thanks to all of you for joining us. We hope you found the session informative and valuable. And thanks to you, those of you that posted questions. We hope that Steve and AFTAB were able to answer your questions to your satisfaction. A reminder that we recorded this event, and that'll be posted probably in about a week, along with the presentation slides, and we made those available. Steve did, and AFTABs will be there as well at the I2 online website. If you have further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And then information on other upcoming webinars is on the Internet 2 events page at internet2.edu/events. Again, thank you, AFTAB. Thank you, Steve. And all of you have a wonderful day.